Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk.
I do worry that this government is really blasé about food and farming because it cannot envisage a circumstance where there is even a moderate disruption of UK accessibility to core food, particularly core carbohydrates. If they're right, well, I'm not sure I still agree with driving farmers out of business. But if they're wrong, the stakes are so high it is unconscionable.
Former Home Secretary James Cleverly says the government must take food security more seriously. As the UK commemorates the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe and the end of World War II, we ask, could we really see the return of rationing? A groundbreaking new farm tenancy agreement, how the Crown Estate and the Tenant Farmers Association are working together, and Rothamsted Research, the world's oldest agricultural research station, announces a big restructuring and 90 redundancies. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
As always, all that and more coming up. But first, the hottest 1st of May on record sees temperatures reach 29 degrees Celsius. A worrying time or just another challenge for growers with crops in the ground? Norfolk farmer Mark Means.
Slightly concerned. For example, our sugar beet is due its second timing of herbicide. We're holding back on that this week because of the high temperatures. That could create the beet plant to get a little bit crispy, so a slight concern on that. We're holding off sprays because of the dryness. Cereals are okay at the moment, but I think give it another 7 to 10 days, still no rain, they could be suffering again. The last uptake of nitrogen could be hindered.
How much rain have you had?
3 millimetres in March, and we've had 40 mil in April. But that was just 2 rain events. The first lot came down nice and steady. The second 20 mil came down in about 10 minutes. So realistically, we've probably had 20 mil of rain.
That's Norfolk grower Mark Means talking to Louise, who also caught up with agronomist Alice Andrews.
I think 3 weeks ago I was quite concerned. Heading into the end of April, things were just starting to show signs of drought stress and nitrogen deficiencies. Most places got a decent amount of rain towards the end of the month and have picked up really nicely since then. So at the moment, I'm not too worried. Crops are clean. They have taken up some nitrogen and they are sort of growing at the rate that we'd like for this time of year. But I would like to see some in the forecast in the next 2 weeks.
And you say that crops are very clean. What effect is that having on spray decisions going forward?
I think hopefully it would mean that we can reduce spend slightly on fungicides, but obviously we have to be mindful that there is quite a long way to go once T2s have gone on. So we'll be treating the current condition of the crop, but also making sure that we've got enough protection heading into ear emergence.
So we've discussed today some T2 options ranging in price from, say, £50 a hectare up to £80 a hectare. Quite difficult to go at the upper range of that when you're looking at a clean crop.
Definitely, it's difficult to justify, and again, that is much more down to product choice than rates. So if you can get away with using a decent T2 product that is down that lower end, I would urge people to do so.
And plant growth regulators must have been a bit tricky this year. Any advice on that?
Definitely has been tricky. Things have been slow to grow, slow to get away, and also it's been very cold at night up until now, so you don't want to sort of push things too hard on the PGR. But again, you don't know what rain's going to come, and we've still got a lot to go in the growing season. So anything that is stressed or looking deficient or looking droughty, I would cut back.
Alice Andrews there. And before Alice, Mark Means. Louise, some real conundrum stuff for arable growers this spring. Last year the spray was sinking. This year it's dry but crops are clean. But that could change if it starts to rain.
Absolutely, Johann. That's the balance that has got to be struck at some stage. Of course, it is very difficult to justify the cost of some of these flag leaf fungicides while crops are still so clean. But of course, the fungicides, they are protectant, not curative really. So you've got to have enough flexibility in your spray programs for when the weather changes, which it undoubtedly will do at some stage. Of the farms that I've been on this week, they're not desperate for rain yet. They would like to see some in the forecast, but most of them had some rain over that Easter weekend. Up until then, there'd been a fairly slow uptake of nitrogen, but that's now gone in, I think. So crops are racing through really to flag leaf. I was going to say at the start of this week that they will get to flag leaf in 3 weeks' time, but of course it is temperature driven crop development, and it has been very hot this week, so things have speeded up somewhat.
Any update on the yellow rust situation that we reported on a few weeks ago, Louise?
Well, yeah, there is an update. I mean, it probably has been a bit too hot for yellow rust this week. It doesn't really like the really high temperatures that we've had. But next week, we're going to be right back in the right sort of territory for yellow rust. One of the farms that I've been on this week is looking for a Group 4 wheat variety replacement. He's been growing Graham for quite some time. So he has put in 2 sort of trial areas, one of Typhoon and one of Beowulf, and both of those have come down with yellow rust, which unexpected yellow rust. So that really does put him back to square one, but it does show what a good idea it was to take a look at a variety before you actually jump in with both feet. So and other people are reporting it, looking for it. I think, as I said, next week will be really important, but it does seem to be quite an issue at the moment.
And the hottest 1st of May on record, Hugh, 29 degrees, not too far away from you. Southwest London, that was recorded, as I understand, affecting the silage situation.
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of people have got going with silage, understandably. And there's some okay stuff out there. There's some nice quality, particularly on some of the Westerwolds, some of the sort of fast grass 1 year laid type things. But some real challenges, though. People have put slurry on or digestate on, for example, because of the lack of rainfall. It just hasn't washed in. So they're sort of chancing it a bit because there's still crust in the bottom of the sward, which obviously is the last thing you want, is that in your bale or in your clamp. It's some and some, and then the later grasses are suffering because the lack of moisture. But look, what's out there, some of it actually looks really lovely. We hope to get some in next week. It looks really nice, but there's not going to be a bumper crop like last week. But the worry is then what comes after that in terms of rainfall and how that'll impact second cuts. I mean, if we get some rain mid-May, second cuts will be away, and we might end up with better second cuts in terms of bulk than the first cuts. The caveat to this, of course, is down the west side, they've had reasonable rain, and there's some amazing looking silage crops. So it's all us usual people in the east and the south, and but I think down the middle is probably dry because East Anglia's had more rain than we've had in the last couple of 3 weeks, albeit not much more. We've not all had a little amount, but down in the central southern bit, we've had virtually none. So it's interesting. And crops this side of the Thames as well. I was talking to someone in Sussex yesterday. The wheat is getting drought stressed. It's putting its flag leaf up now. It's stopped tillering, and it's like, that's it. And that's quite worrying. So, and a lot of spring crops gone in around here as well, particularly with the changes with SFI. So it's all a bit to play for, really. Hopefully we get some rain in a week or two.
I did come across some irrigation going on in Suffolk this week, and in fact, one of the farms that I was on, they had just irrigated their sugar beet. So, as you say, spring crops, and it has been very dry on that farm, so they were just doing that to make certain that it gets away. These very dry conditions, then with something like sugar beet, you can't really put a pre-em herbicide on because it just won't work. So that's something they're just having to tinker with as well. So they'll be hoping for some rain over there, I'm sure.
Still all to play for then when it comes to realising yield potential, Louise?
Yeah, look, I think sort of 70% probably of wheat crops are really showing good potential. And, they did really pick up after the rain that most people, not all, most people had at Easter. So that's good. They're happily going along at the moment. But as we said before, they just need to see a little bit of rain in the forecast at some stage.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk. We hope you enjoy the listen.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, farmers gathered in central London this week to warn the government that you can't defend a nation on an empty stomach. Calling on the government to take food security more seriously, the Save British Farming campaign group held their protest beside a war memorial in Whitehall. It comes as the UK commemorates the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe and the end of World War II. Northern Irish farmer William Taylor.
Today, the message is quite straightforward. Our Prime Minister keeps talking about energy security and national security, but forgets that you can't have national security without food security. Today is all about getting the message across. Wake up and smell the coffee. Food security is on the ropes, and we need you to listen.
You've also got a banner here which says ration books are coming. You've got a ration book with you. Do you really think that is something that's going to become reality?
Well, look, we have to go to drastic measures to make a drastic point, because when people aren't listening, like, it's okay when they sit down, to the next meal and the next one and the next one. But if somebody comes down to their table, instead of bringing their food, brings them a grain of wheat and says, here, go feed yourself, a reality check has to drop into place here, and very quickly.
That's Northern Irish farmer William Taylor. Campaign coordinator Liz Webster had a similar message for the government.
Even without war, climate is more of a problem than ever, and it's increasing across the world. We need to start producing more food. We need a food production plan.
And with the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe just around the corner, particularly pertinent.
Exactly, and we walked into war with an appeasing Prime Minister in 1939. And to me, it feels like we're repeating history. And I don't want to repeat history. We can be prepared and we can make sure that we have a plan. But we're running out of time.
Liz Webster there from Save British Farming. Speakers at a media briefing held after the protest included former Home Secretary James Cleverly. He too had a stark message.
My experience as Foreign Secretary, I was speaking to an Egyptian political interlocutor who was basically saying that the Egyptian government subsidises bread and it subsidises fuel. And if ordinary Egyptians cannot afford those two things, governments get overthrown. And that was a real wake-up call, because they think about food security in the Egyptian government every single day. It's a desert country. That's unsurprising. And what really struck me when I came back to the UK is we don't, not even a little bit, because we think we're too clever to ever worry about that kind of stuff. And when you stop worrying about things as existential as the ability to feed your population, that's when you make big mistakes potentially. And I do worry that this government is really blasé about food and farming, because it cannot envisage a circumstance where there is even a moderate disruption of UK accessibility to core food, particularly core carbohydrates. If they're right, well, I'm not sure I still agree with driving farmers out of business. But if they're wrong, the stakes are so high, it is unconscionable.
That's former Home Secretary James Cleverly. Now, DEFRA says it does take food security seriously, and that's one reason it's going further to develop a 25-year farming roadmap. It also says it's determined to make the farming sector more profitable and has appointed former NFU President Minette Batters to lead a review of farming profitability. So, Hugh, James Cleverly saying, essentially, I guess we've got short memories and we're in danger of forgetting the importance of food security. And indeed, as Save British Farming, this photo opportunity in Whitehall, they were saying you can't defend a nation on an empty stomach. And this coming just a few days before the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. So it all sort of comes together in its historical context, brought right up to the present day.
Food security is national security. Look, James Cleverly is not wrong in what he was saying, although I'll spin your minds back 3 or 4 years when we were sat on this very podcast saying the then Conservative administration, who was obsessed with all of the green payments and doing all the environmental stuff, we're saying, that's all very well mentioning this, but you need to mention food and you need to mention food production. I mean, that's not a long time ago. So it's all very convenient for people of whichever political colour to come out and say, oh, yes, it's all... But it is. Look, bottom line is we know food security is national security. The current administration, to be fair, when they stand up ministerially and say, talk to farmers, as Steve Reid has done over the last however many months, everyone I've been to, he does mention that food security is national security. Now, some may then question the policies and the attitudes that then sit around that, but they acknowledge that. But yes, it needs to be sort of gelled in, doesn't it, in terms of where we go. And it's a no-brainer in a geopolitical world with the changes and all the stuff that's going on, then layer in the climate stuff, which we're all feeling, every one of us farming everywhere in the world now, then yeah, it's a no-brainer. It needs to be. And look, perhaps it's the government's got this food plan, which is going to release at the end of this year. Perhaps we might see some more clarity and more of a long-term plan there. But it does absolutely need to be a long-term plan. And with the whole environmental and all the legislative stuff, Tom Bradshaw and the NFU have said it many times. We legislate around water quality and air quality. We're legislating around biodiversity within DEFRA's environment plan, but there is absolutely nothing talking about any legislative or framework around food production and food integrity and resilience.
And Louise, Save British Farming saying that we have to see, or the government has to see, it has to consider agriculture within its wider context. This is not just about farming exceptionalism, as it were, farming being a special case. Farming is far more important than the current Labour administration gives it credit for. It delivers so much, and it is the bedrock upon which the food and drinks industry, a multi-billion-pound industry, is based on.
Yes, it is, isn't it? And I think, all the players in supply chains are realising that at the moment and putting more effort and more emphasis, if you like, on the farming side of things. Interesting to hear James Cleverly say that because, as Hugh's just pointed out, I can actually remember an episode of BBC Question Time when James Cleverly was a cabinet minister and he was on a panel with Minette Batters. And I can remember Minette very strongly trying to get the government to commit to a food production target. And he was having to use all the skills he had to evade giving her the answer that she wanted to hear. So, yeah, they've changed their tune on that. That's a good thing, isn't it, as far as farming is concerned? But the current government, they're just showing that they don't really understand farming and they don't really get it. So that's the problem that we're facing at the moment.
Some people could say, though, could they not, just acting a bit as devil's advocate, that they're also in a scenario where obviously they're budget constrained. So it's almost like they're stripping out everything around the grant systems, around everything, around the whole support network around farming, stripping it back to bare basics to see, I don't know, see how it performs, see what really does creak going forward, because it's never been shaken down like this for a very long time, has it? It's been a fairly steady run. Certainly the last 20, the post-IAX 1993 years have been pretty steady in terms of the support block going right the way through. So this shakedown is happening now. I think what governments need to get their head around, and this is where in a post-Brexit world they're constantly paranoid, is the whole issue around trade. And it's actually saying, if you want a fully resilient, solid supply base to supply your food infrastructure within your nation state, then there comes a point where you have to say, this bit of this is out of ground or off limits when it comes to trade, which is a really it's a tricky thing for a government to do if it precludes them from a deal that might involve non-food sector benefits to the UK economy. So it's a really tricky one to spin, because it's very easy to say, yes, we take all food stuff out of this, we become very insular on food, but we'll trade defence, we'll trade services, we'll trade whatever. And then another country wants to reciprocate with something else. But at some point, they need to try and work out. It would be great if there was a global agreement, wasn't it, where the nations all turned around and said, we have our food resilience bit and we have our own food reserve bit in terms of trade, and then we trade commodities over and above that, but assuming that they're all done to the same standard. I don't know. It's not an easy one to fathom.
So the reality at the moment, though, Hugh, is that I can walk into a supermarket and buy whatever food I want whenever I want. So are we really that worried about food security?
You're just a happy home county shopper, aren't you? With not a care in the world, with the globe on your retail shelf down the road. I think the system is... Actually, we've seen it. We've seen stress points come out in the system, whether it's, Almira lettuce crops failing because the weather's wrong and there's been no salad on the shelf at Christmas. We've seen the jolt through the egg supply chain the other year. We are seeing a constraint on protein production globally at the moment because of various factors. I actually think the supply chain is far, far more stressed than probably the supply chain realises. And then probably, or certain players in the supply chain realise, or consumers realise. I really do, and I think as with what's happening in the world at the moment, with the climate, with the geopolitical situation, and just the sheer demand for food, that it constantly goes up. There's not a lot of stuff around the planet at the moment that is in mass abundance. The caveat to that being, obviously, cereal commodity crops at the moment, because that is a fairly lackluster market. But then it doesn't take much to throw a spike through that, a 5% deviation globally, and suddenly the markets go, crazy. So I think we are more strained than we probably ever have been in terms of supply chains. The supply chains work amazingly well. We have a phenomenal abundance on the shelves. We are blessed beyond Western nations with all of the abundance that we have, but there is definitely serious stress in many forms in that supply chain.
I think there's not only severe stress here. I think that we're also in a very precarious position. It's only a few months ago, Professor Tim Lang was warning that we rely too much on just-in-time delivery. So this isn't, yes, it is 80 years since VE Day, but this is not about a threat of U-boats in the Channel or the North Atlantic convoys not being able to get food across the Atlantic to us. This is about things like just-in-time supply chains. And we've seen it this week in terms of the cyber attacks, the hacking attacks against companies like Marks and Spencer, the Co-op, and Harrods. It doesn't take much for this supply chain to be disrupted. If that happens in a big way to food, we could all be in serious trouble.
And it was interesting to see Sir Terry Leahy, who's the former boss of Tesco, actually writing in the Times this week very much about this issue and saying food security needs to be addressed. Now, he is somebody with many years of experience with supply chain, so he would actually know what he was talking about.
It does need to be looked at, absolutely. But then what's the alternative to, we're used to this just in time. We're used to this Amazon lifestyle now where, I get stuff for the farm now from Amazon, and lots of other people do as well. It's not just books and stuff for the kids. I buy solar panel for electric fencer, in 38 quid later, it turns up the next day. So we're so used to that just in time way that we work everything, and that we keep the least amount of stock on the shelf, whether it's within our own businesses or in those supply businesses. What's the alternative, Johann? Do we go back to having what they call buffer depots? They were set up as a reaction to the Cold War and potential nuclear Armageddon, and the government had warehouses around the country full of tins. And every so often, they'd have to clear all these tins out. And I was speaking to an old guy that lived down the road from us years ago, and he would talk about there was tins of beans being given away, tons at a time. Because what is the alternative, Johann? Some sort of we're back to the local food, 1752 bucolic, idyllic lifestyle, wearing our smocks, eating turnips in the winter and salad for a week in the summer.
I'm not advocating the return of the tithe barn or anything like that, but it does illustrate the importance of food security, and we do take things for granted. We do live in that, like you say, that Amazon era of a click of the mouse and something will be here tomorrow, or in some cases even today. We need to recognise the importance of food security and the importance of domestic production as well, and of more resilient supply chains.
No, you're definitely right. The key thing here is that out of all of this debate, it's great that we're talking about it. It's great that Sir Terry Leahy's talking about it in the Times. It's great that it's being talked about on lots of different levels. As I said earlier, the government's got this food plan coming out later this year. I suppose we should do all our best to respond to consultations on that, to make sure that it is recognised in policy at whatever level, in whichever department, that food security is part of our national security. Something we've been saying forever, something that some politicians are now coming to the table to say for the right or the wrong reasons.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us, podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. Louise, some big news this week. A restructuring at Rothamsted Research, I think the world's oldest agricultural research facility there at Harpenden in Hertfordshire, and 90 redundancies. That's about 25% of the people that work there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. So obviously sympathy for anybody who is losing their job and wasn't expecting to. But this is part of a refocus for Rothamsted, which is taking place over the next 5 years. So what they've done is they've identified what their research priorities need to be, and they are now streamlining their operations accordingly. I think probably it's indicative of what's happening in the wider industry at the moment. You know, everybody is looking to secure their long-term sustainable future. As I said, it's a shame for those who won't still be working at Rothamsted. Obviously, there's tremendous expertise there and some fantastic facilities. And I suppose the other side of this really is that, but of course, farming does need some new solutions, and there is some real urgency there now. So if this refocus means that that's what's going to come out of it, then that's got to be a good thing.
Much of Rothamsted's funding, Louise, of course, comes from the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, the BBSRC, millions and millions of pounds. There has been, everybody is under pressure when it comes to funding at the moment. Rothamsted's future is safe, though. This is about securing a sustainable future for Rothamsted, not about winding it down or anything like that.
Yeah, no, the press release that we've all received is very much makes that point. It is a refocus, a reset, and yeah, it is to reflect what's going on out there. We all know how much farming is changing. Everything else is having to change with it. Many of us can remember when Rothamsted used to have the, I think it was called the Rothamsted Research Association, and that was a link in with farmers and agronomists, and they used to have fairly regular meetings there, and it was a very good way of getting some of the research results, out to the practical farm level. I don't think that association still runs anymore. Certainly I haven't come across it at all recently, but perhaps they need to look at some of those sorts of initiatives again, because as I said, there's a lot of expertise there and some very good work done there. So it's making it relevant to what's happening at the farm level at the moment, and good luck to them with that.
Other things happening at the farm level, Hugh, fly tipping, and Steve Reed, DEFRA Secretary Steve Reed. Steve Crusher, well, exactly, Steve Crusher Reed. Steve Reed's answer to a lot of things at the moment seems to be crushing them. Tell me more, Hugh.
Yeah, the announcement this week that the government wants to crack down on fly tippers and use lots more. Look, it's all words. It's great words. And I mean, he mentioned it at the NFU conference back in February when he was talking about people bringing illegal meat into the UK, that those vans should be crushed. They're now talking about fly tippers if they're caught and you're trying to use more smart technology, cameras, 4G cameras, all that stuff to catch. We've got it round here. We've got one lane. It's doing my head in. It's just constant. It's just little petty building jobs just left on the side of the road in 4 bags with an old mattress. It just does your head in. So that's welcome. Let's just hope that the funding is, and the infrastructure and the kit, whether it's the people on the ground to actually enforce it. Because let's not forget, waste enforcement belongs to local councils, and most local councils, as we know, haven't got a pot to whatever. So you've got to resource these. It's good announcement. Also in the news this week, NFU saying they're not going to any of the major party conferences later this year, saving cash. And I can sort of see why, because we're at the start of the political cycle. Save your money for a couple of years and then roll it all out in a couple of years' time. And also another, really, I think for me as a livestock farmer, some DEFRA data come out which shows that where you do effectively in the low-risk area, where you get these low-risk area TB hotspots, where you go in and do wildlife control, you get some serious payback in terms of disease, both in the wildlife and reduction in disease in the overall cattle population in those areas. It was looking at Lincolnshire and also the Cumbria Area 32 control area, which happened as well. And it's an absolute no-brainer. You can see how absolutely crucial that wildlife control is to sorting out disease. So lots going on.
Yeah, lots going on in the news. And Hugh, what's going on in the markets?
Thank you, Johann. This week, finished steer deadweight creeps up again by another couple of pence. 702.6 finished steer deadweight. The live weight SQQ for the UK on cattle goes down 383.2. That has actually gone back 4p. Sheep price is just edging off as well. Possibly, I don't know, I'll have a guess and say it's probably to do with the pound strengthening, because it seems to be strengthening against the dollar and the euro at the moment with all that's going on in the world. Lambs SQQ deadweight this week, 686. That's back from 702.9 last week. And then the live weight is running at 321. It's just dropped back a penny. So it's just a bit of easing there. Pig prices just dropped back half a penny, 205 dead on this week. The SPP was 205.57 last week. The arable prices, I'm afraid, reflect that strengthening currency with no exceptions, actually. Well, partly one at the bottom. Feed wheat has gone back about £2, 163.50. Milling wheat 176.70. That's dropped back quite a bit, about £5 on the week. Feed barley drops back £1 to £155.10. Oilseed rapes drop back nearly £20, 429.50. Field peas have actually gained £6, 209.5. Feed beans, 219.10. That's gained a fiver as well. If you're buying diesel this week, you should have been paying Wednesday morning ring round. Gets us a slightly increased price. Actually, it's gone up about a penny on the week, or just under a penny on the week. 64.25 for a litre of red tractor diesel.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, the Crown Estate, which includes 121,000 acres of tenanted farms across England, has introduced a groundbreaking tenancy agreement for its farmers. The Environmental Farm Business Tenancies, or EFBTs, make it much easier for farmers to diversify and pursue additional income streams, including from the environment. Here's Paul Sedgwick from the Crown Estate to explain how they work.
It's our attempt at trying to answer the question of how do you get this balance right between food production and nature recovery, because there has to be both, to try and enable our farmers to succeed long term. So we've had to look at longer length of tenancy. Before, we were doing 2 to 3 year terms. Now we're doing 15-year terms. But we found a way of dealing with the valuation implications around that, because as a commercial business, that's quite important to us. But we've worked a workaround with the TFA on that. We're driving forward diversification at scale across all our farms. We've got about 200 live projects at the moment, which is significant. We're putting funding available to our farmers for no regrets nature recovery moves, and that has had some huge success. We've planted over 300 kilometres of hedgerows in the last 3 years. We're trying to average 100 kilometres a year, and the aspiration is to hit 1,000 kilometres by 2035. and we're planting a lot of woodland. But what we're doing is sort of trying to set the guardrails for our farmers to come forward with these ideas, and then we're working through mechanisms to help fund, whether that's through government schemes or the Crown Estate, but equally to make sure that it aligns long term to what everyone wants. Food production is absolutely core to what we do with our rural estates, but I think there's been a huge realisation within the Crown and nationally that the nature crisis, the biodiversity crisis, has got to be tackled.
As Paul Sedgwick from the Crown Estate, the agreements were developed in partnership with the Tenant Farmers Association. TFA Chief Executive George Dunn.
It is a huge breakthrough, and it's really good that we're doing it with a landlord of the stature of the Crown Estate, who in the past hasn't had that greater relationship with its rural estate over recent years, and it's fallen back in love with it. And this idea of having a collegiate cooperative agreement with its tenants is really, really good news.
And it does give opportunities, I guess, to both landlords and tenants. It is very much a partnership approach.
It's an open book approach, and in these agreements you will see opportunities for tenants to come forward with ideas for environmental improvement and also for diversification, where the benefits of both of those will be shared between the landlord and the tenant according to input and risk. So mostly in agreements you will see tenants restricted to agricultural use only. Sometimes they will need the consent of the landlord to do stuff. Sometimes that consent will be couched in terms that it won't be unreasonably withheld or delayed. In this agreement, the expectation is the tenant will come forward with ideas, and those ideas will be considered by the landlord. So it's an excellent way forward.
Some farmers might say that they should be able to make a living from food production and food production alone. But I guess the reality is in many, many cases, we need to be looking across the board at all opportunities to generate revenue and to create profitable and sustainable farm businesses.
Yeah, I mean, this new EFBT agreement isn't going to fix the supply chain. And there are other things that we need to do within the supply chain to make sure that farmers are properly rewarded for the input that they have and for the great food that they're producing. But in the context of the environment in which we're operating, this agreement gives tenant farmers real choice to do food, to do environment, and to do diversification.
TFA Chief Executive George Dunn. Kevin Kennedy from Solicitors Burgess Salmon drew up the agreements.
The idea of this is to really push the conversation on to have a different sort of relationship between the landlord and the tenant, far more of a partnership relationship rather than just a list of what you are not allowed to do. And one of the things we did at an early stage was workshop this with groups of the Crown Estates tenants, which go from very nature-based estates to real hardcore food production, fenland style estates. And what this is something to enable people to farm. That's the first thing. It's not telling people how to farm. And I think that's quite important for the farmers to understand, because otherwise there is quite a bit of green noise that's made that can be quite unattractive. And then it's putting the other stuff around it that goes quite naturally with it, the nature stuff, the stewardship mindset that most farmers really do naturally and instinctively work with. And then on the other side, some of the, I think, more longer term, potentially more exciting stuff actually, is this whole idea of the social benefit, by which, when I'm talking about that there, social and economic benefit, diversification, and also the farm's role in its community, so that rather than having what we've seen, which is fewer people involved in farms, we're actually getting more people involved in farms, and the farms being restored in a way to being more of an economic hub for their communities.
That's Kevin Kennedy from Solicitors Burgess Salmon, and those EFBTs, those environmental farm business tenancies, were launched at this week's Tenant Farmers Association conference held on the Windsor estate. Hugh Louise, groundbreaking stuff.
So, Johann, these agreements support both farming and environmental goals, is that right?
That's exactly right, Louise. And what they're designed to do is reflect the challenges that farmers face and reflect, I guess, the face of modern farming and modern agriculture. In other words, that yes, it is about food production, but they also recognise that there are other opportunities there for growers and livestock producers to generate revenue from diversification and the environment. So where traditional FBTs have sometimes been very restrictive depending on the landlord's attitude to diversification. These are actually a partnership approach that encourage diversification, encourage environmental revenues as well.
So that's always been a bit of a grey area, hasn't it? Whether tenants are allowed to participate in these private market schemes and who really benefits from those. How have they sorted that out?
Well, it's taken 15 iterations to get this far. As Kevin Kennedy was saying, there have been sort of lots of toing and froing, amicably, I might ask. This has been something that has very much been a collegiate approach, working together to try and find answers to the challenges that farmers face. And the idea is that there'll be a little bit of investment from the landlord, a little bit of investment from the tenant, and they will share that risk, but also share the rewards. And there will be an equitable split of revenue going either way, depending on what the agreement is. So they're extremely flexible, but also extremely forward-looking, and for 15 years as well. So where you've got this typical FBT agreement being 3 to 5 years, often 3 to 4 perhaps, this is a 15-year agreement with not much of a get-out clause for the landlord, only in exceptional circumstances. So it really encourages tenants to feel secure in their tenure and want to invest, rather than thinking, well, it's really difficult for me to invest for the future when I don't really know what that future holds.
So much easier then to build a thriving business.
That's exactly the idea. Acknowledging that we're in an era where government support is ebbing away, or has indeed largely ebbed away from the sector, especially things like the basic payment scheme. We know that the sustainable farming incentives closed to new applications, and looking at a mix of revenue streams to indeed, develop that thriving business and look to the future.
I mean, this has been, for years, I suppose, between landlord and tenant, the sort of alternative third stream revenue, be that diversification, environmental or whatever. In some ways, Johann, it's been the elephant in the room, hasn't it? Because the tenant doesn't want to get drawn down anything because they know that landlord will probably say no. But I suppose having it all out in the open, agreeing a split figure, agreeing what you can and can't do from the outset, and then having a 15-year or it could be 20-year, I suppose, run at it. It makes sense for landlords that want to invest and want their tenants to succeed. And it's fantastic news for the tenants.
Yeah, it is. And I was saying to Paul Sedgwick from the Crown Estate, I said, is this going to be an optional thing, or is everybody going to be able to do this? And he said that they see that their FBT agreements will be transitioned towards this environmental farm business tenancy agreement, and they are really looking forward to working with their tenants a lot more closely. I mean, I think, as you heard George Dunn say, this is about the Crown Estate really falling back in love with their rural estate, with farming, and wanting it to succeed well into the future. I must emphasise that this is just the Crown Estate at the moment that has developed this, backed by the TFA. I think it's the first time that the Tenant Farmers Association has endorsed a tenancy agreement that's been developed like this. So both tenants and landlord work very closely. But the hope is that other institutional landlords could use this as a blueprint to develop their own system. So for the landlords to be to get that tenant farm income in terms of rent, etc., they need tenants to succeed in farming, and we all know the challenges that farming faces at the moment when it comes to generating revenue and getting a sustainable income.
And it's also, or whether it's institutional landlords, any landlord could take the principle. The other thing to think about, I suppose, going forward as well is back to the old inheritance tax argument and all the debate that's going around that. It's exactly the landlords that are willing to invest and let their tenants invest and succeed going forward and offer long tenancies. Those are exactly the places where you need to incentivise with the taxation system, as opposed to the lazy landlords that just take the money, do nothing, invest nothing, and don't give you a very long term. So it plays perfectly into that theory as well, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And the other thing is that the return on capital employed is often higher on a tenanted farm than it is on an owner-occupied holding, simply because the tenant has to be more entrepreneurial. So you find that this gives them the ability to do that. And of course, the landlord gains a little bit of a reward as well. And if you want to know more about these EFBTs, Environmental Farm Business Tenancies, we've got a podcast special based around a Farmers Weekly question time session that I hosted at the Tenant Farmers Association conference, and we'll be putting that podcast out in the coming days. That's it though for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do leave us a 5-star review, and please do subscribe to the Farmers Weekly podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, you can email us at podcast@fwi.co.uk, and if you're in the UK itself, you can also message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. For now though, until next week when we'll have more news, views and analysis about all the big stories in UK agriculture, I'm Johann Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening.